Hi, everyone. We're walking through these last days of Jesus' life in the week we call Holy Week. We learned yesterday that on Monday of Holy Week, Jesus and his disciples were walking past a fig tree, and Jesus used that as a teaching moment for the disciples. Beginning in Mark 11, chapter 20, we find ourselves on Tuesday morning, and Jesus and his disciples are walking past the same fig tree. Only this time, the disciples notice that the fig tree is dead. It has withered from its roots. Jesus once again uses this opportunity to teach the disciples about faith and forgiveness, and you'll find that in Mark chapter 11. I think Jesus is making the most of every opportunity he has with his disciples this week to build into them a foundation of faith that's going to carry them through this next difficult journey, beginning on Friday when Jesus is put to death, carrying on through his burial, his resurrection, and ultimately life on earth without Jesus, where the disciples are supposed to carry on. So Jesus uses ordinary things like fig trees to build into them. As Jesus and his disciples continue to approach Jerusalem, the crowds are gathering to hear what Jesus has to say, and it doesn't take long before the authorities who are opposing Jesus to kind of swoop in. They ask Jesus 4 questions beginning in Mark chapter 11. These questions were not for the purpose of gaining knowledge or insight or wisdom from Jesus. And as we read in John 11, these authorities have already purposed themselves to kill Jesus. So what they needed was some evidence against him, something, a slip up of his mouth, some sort of false teaching that they could accuse him in front of the people so that they wouldn't revolt when they brought him to be put to death. So these questions, again, were not innocent. They're intended to trap Jesus so they could accuse him. You can read the entire accounts of these 4 questions in Mark chapter 11 and 12. But today I'd just like to briefly focus mostly on Jesus's response and how he handled these questions. So the trap question number 1, they ask him, by what authority do you do these things, or who gave you the authority to do them? Jesus knew that they didn't really want to know the answer to that question. And so his response to them is so classic Jesus. He answers their question in the form of a carefully designed question of his own, a question that his accusers couldn't answer without condemning themselves. And so when they realized they really couldn't answer it, they just said, we don't know the answer to that. And so Jesus says, well, then I'm not going to answer your question either. And he begins instead to teach parables that point to their own self-righteousness and hypocrisy. Trap number 2. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? Another question that has great implications. If Jesus answers yes, then he's going to disappoint the people that don't want him to be for the Roman government. They're expecting him to go against the Roman government, and they don't want to pay taxes to Caesar. However, if he says no, that they shouldn't pay taxes, then the authorities are going to accuse him of rebelling against the government. So what Jesus says is, why are you trying to trap me? And in a brilliant move, he answers this: do both. Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. Pay your taxes and honor God. They were truly amazed at his response. Third question is in the form of a hypothetical story, basically poking fun at Jesus's belief in the resurrection, which they didn't believe in. Is there marriage in heaven? Jesus is very bold this time. He confronts and corrects their lack of understanding of Scripture and the power of God. He uses Scripture to answer their own question. And once again, they are silent. They just don't know what to say to him. Finally, the big stumper question, or so they thought. Which commandment is the most important of all? Now, the Jewish law had over 600 commandments, and if Jesus chose one, he knew he was going to set himself up for arguments. And so instead, Jesus, wise Jesus, summed the law up basically like this: love. Love God and love people. Jesus, full of grace and truth, answered each one of those questions confidently and calmly. He set an example for his disciples as he dealt with each question. He showed them how to answer. He showed them how to use scripture to answer. He showed them how not to get ensnared by the traps of others. He taught them how to look at tough questions through the lenses of grace and truth instead of ritual and rule following. He taught them how to deal head-on with hypocrisy and conniving schemes, to speak boldly and clearly, and he taught them how to look for a glimmer of hope in anyone who might be on the verge of understanding spiritual truth. And I'm so thankful that God preserved these valuable moments so that we could learn from them too.